Well, jeepers! You're listening to Smash or Pass.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another interview on the JayBee and Milly channel. I am JayBee, and of course, with me is Milly.
Hi.
And the special guest who will be interviewing today is Michael Ryan. Thank you so much for joining.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me.
So it's incredible to have you here today. Like, without a shadow of a doubt, people watching this will be familiar with your name from the credits of, I'm sure, countless Scooby-Doo projects at this point. If we tried to list them all, we'd be here for hours. But yeah, it's amazing to have you here today. So thank you so much for joining.
Thank you. Yeah, it's been a big part of my life, Scooby-Doo, definitely. I mean, I think, gosh, going back, I was just thinking about it because I was one of the first Scooby scripts I ever wrote was for Johnny Bravo, which was called Bravo Dooby Doo. And it was like, gosh, I hate to say what year that was, but I think it was like 1997 or something. And that was one of the very first ones. And I know it's a crossover for Johnny Bravo, so it doesn't really count as a pure Scooby script, but it was a labor of love. I was really proud of that script.
Yeah, definitely looking forward to getting into that a little bit later because it's definitely something that we want to touch upon with it being such an iconic piece of media at this point as well. But in terms of you and your career, at least from what I can see on IMDb, although I know that that's not always accurate, your career started in 1992 or
Before there
thereabouts.
was a IMDb. Yeah, that's
I,
the problem with a lot of my credits
yeah,
on
yeah.
IMDb. It's like it didn't even exist when I was doing those things. I don't really think I started with credits until I did the What a Cartoon program I came on to Hanna-Barbera and was working there, and it was just becoming Cartoon Network under the Turner administration, and Fred Seibert had been brought on, and he had started the What a Cartoon program, the shorts program. So I pitched a couple shorts, I sold a couple short cartoons, 7-minute cartoons, and then that was, gosh, what was that? Was that 93 or was that 95? It was somewhere in there, and somewhere around 94. And so, yeah, so I guess going back to about 92, 93, 94, somewhere in there is where it started. I'd have to look at the exact dates to be sure. It's all a bit blurry, but and it feels like yesterday, simultaneously. And then I got on the Real Adventures of Johnny Quest, and I was writing for that, and then became story editor. And then I was writing on and then I did the Bravo Dooby Doo script as an audition piece to work for Van Partible on Johnny Bravo, and the script was pretty much produced as I wrote it, and I was really excited about that. And that was kind of, then I became story editor on Johnny Bravo, and then Count Chicken, and I wrote for Dexter's Lab and Powerpuff Girls, and so it was like sort of a golden moment in animation, and I was like luckily just right in the middle of it. So
I guess my question to that end was, at what stage, possibly before that, did you know that you wanted to become a writer and go into either writing for animation or any other type?
I didn't actually start out wanting to write for animation when I was young. When I was a kid, I always wanted to write. I mean, ever since I was about 8, I think. I had a brilliant fourth grade teacher who kind of encouraged me to write, and then I wanted to write, very serious things, and I was a very serious person. Actually, I wasn't, but I wanted to be a serious person, even though I've never been a serious person. And I was always sort of writing the great American novel and short stories and stuff like that. And I had a great professor at school in the university who said, if you want to write, go to one of the coasts. So okay, great. So I ended up in Los Angeles. And I'm like, this is really hard to make a living writing. And I ended up working in documentaries and helping write dialogue for documentaries and helping producers produce documentaries. And my wife got pregnant at the time, and I needed a job that had insurance, and so I sent out a blind ad. I answered a blind ad in the Variety, which was back then it was an actual paper magazine. This was like the 90s, and I ended up at Hanna-Barbera, like just pure luck, and working in the art program, the cell art, the gallery artwork program. You probably have some. I think I've seen you post some of them, and I was there, and I was like, oh my God, I love cartoons. I grew up loving animation cartoons, and I grew up on Scooby-Doo, and I grew up on Hanna-Barbera, and I grew up on everybody. All the Hanna-Barbera characters were my favorite. I mean, Yogi Bear was my absolute favorite, and Scooby-Doo, forget about it. I must have watched the first, well, the 69 season, the very first one, and also then all the movies, which then we did again just recently, a version of that in Guess Who, Scooby-Doo Guess Who, which maybe we should talk about because that was a blast. You just had Chris Bailey on, I saw that, and Mike Milo. So yeah, that'll be very appropriate. So I grew up on all that, and I was like, oh my God, I've just sort of stepped into the most beautiful like luck ever. And I started writing for free. And then the shorts program came up, and I sold two. And then after that it was just like, I'm gonna write animation. And I have been writing animation pretty much nonstop ever since. So that's like, gosh, almost 30 years. I hate to even count the numbers.
It certainly sounds like you had a really interesting journey into animation. And can I ask, kind of like we say, in early stages, I know you said that you wanted to be a writer from such a young age. Do you remember if there was any writers that you particularly enjoyed or felt inspired by?
For sure. I mean, so many. There's just too many to list, really. But I mean, I think kind of standard. I do love English literature. That was what was my major in university. And I mean, I grew up reading all the. I'm gonna be embarrassed to say because it sounds so stupid when I say it out loud. But I was, of course, I grew up reading all the fantasy stuff. Tolkien was one of my first sort of reading things. I think I read the Lord of the Rings trilogy when I was like 7. I think I remember it because I have older brothers and sisters, and they read to me, and so I picked up reading from them. And so it's not like I was some savant. I was more the idiot part of the savant. And they read to me and got me into reading. And so Tolkien was huge. Lord of the Rings, The Hobbit, those were big for me. Narnia, all the Narnia books, I was obsessed with those at an early age. So yeah, a lot of fantasy. I loved Robert E. Howard and Conan, all the Conan books and or stories rather. And so yeah, that's how I started. And then I got into being more fancy with, F. Scott Fitzgerald and Joseph Conrad. I love Joseph Conrad and Hemingway. And I grew up in Kentucky, so Faulkner was like a thing because it was like the South. But I'm luckily have grown out of that stage. And so just like pretty much literature background of like reading pretty much all sorts of things and loving everything. But those are kind of my core bread and butter writers, I think, growing up. Does that sound stupid? I can't.
No, not at all. Like, what will
No.
surprise a lot of people is just like how our reading habits are stark contrast to what we like to watch. So there's a lot of like fun, fluffy Scooby-Doo stuff up there. But if we just pan the camera down a bit, there's so many like Stephen Kings and horrors down there. It's like, okay,
Yeah, it feels
maybe
like a
unexpected,
contrast.
but yeah, they're all
No, but I
there.
think that's part of it. I think, I mean, you want to just sort of open yourself up to everything and see what you love. And I love animation, and I always did as a kid. And I mean, I grew up on the Warner Brothers, especially the Looney Tunes, the old ones. I mean, because and back in the day before cable, we had like 4 TV channels, and they would play reruns. And the afternoon, they would play all the cartoons, and they would go from the Merry Melodies to the Looney Tunes from, the 30s and 40s. And the 50s, and then they would get into the Hanna-Barbera half hours, which would be reruns of, Huckleberry Hound and Scooby religiously. And I would just absorb those on a daily basis and they would repeat them so much that I memorized them without trying, and so that was a big part of my growing up too, was like, that's it. It was like a lot of reading and a lot of enjoying animated television.
Yeah, it's amazing how much like animation has stayed relevant with so many people because I feel like in any given, type of person or type of age range, there's always that one little group of animated characters that is synonymous with that particular era. Like before we had Huckleberry Hound and other characters that you mentioned, like the Flintstones, but then when I kind of think back to my childhood, I'm thinking about those characters, of course, because we had the reruns, but then there was also characters like Courage the Cowardly Dog, the Powerpuff Girls, and Johnny Bravo, and that's all that I remember watching when I got back from school. And just Johnny Bravo is one that really sticks out to me as being memorable. And so when we mentioned Bravo Dooby Doo, like prior to that point, how familiar were you with that Johnny Bravo series, and what was it like to enter into that world?
It was literally just starting. I mean, I think Van had done Johnny Bravo as a 7-minute What a Cartoon short, and it had been one of the ones chosen. There was, I think they chose the three of them. Cartoon Network chose three sort of winners out of 48, 52. I can't remember how many there were. 56. There was quite a few 7-minute cartoons in the What a Cartoon Shorts program. Like everybody pretty much in Cartoon Network early days had sort of sold one of those and was sort of brought in because of that. And so Van sold Johnny Bravo, and they were just starting it up as a series. And it was like, hey, do you want to write on this? Because I was writing on Johnny Quest. We might have been finishing Johnny Quest, or at least it had gone through this sort of mayhemic kind of upside downness, and I really wasn't, I was a part of it, but I survived it somehow. I don't even know what happened, just dumb luck. And the Bravo Dooby Doo was one of the first like 4 scripts written on Johnny Bravo, if I remember correctly. It was like it was a crazy writing room too. It was like Butch Hartman and Seth MacFarlane of Family Guy, of huge fame, and Steve Marmel and Van Partible. And then I was supposed to come on as story editor, which is like head writer. In animation back, especially in those days, story editor was like, you had to make sure you were a writer, but you'd also make sure that all the other scripts had continuity and character continuity and story continuity. And so it didn't, like, somebody sends in a script and it's like from left field, it's the story editor's job to like, oh, I've got to make this fit the show, and then you rewrite it or whatever, or you give them notes. So that was the job I was up for. And they said, well, we don't even know if you can do this, because it was early days and nobody knew anybody. And I said, well, I'll write a script. What do you want? And Van said, I'd love a Scooby-Doo script. And I was like, sure, I love Scooby-Doo. And so then I wrote Bravo Dooby Doo. Pretty much like I came up with it and I pitched it and I wrote it. And that was my sort of audition piece for Van. And it was a success. And then I was the story editor in that writer's room for the first season. And then after the first season, we went, there was like a change up, and I went to Cow and Chicken, and everybody else kind of went their separate ways. But yeah.
That's incredible. And this might sound like a bit of a broad question, but there's just so much about the storyline of Bravo Dooby Doo, down to what it was like to blend the two worlds together, where stuff came from, like the implied relationship between Velma and Johnny Bravo, like all those story beats that have now just become so iconic. In as broad a way as possible, what was it like to fuse those worlds together? And do you remember if there's any like behind the scenes of where certain story beats came from?
It was a blast. I mean, it was like heaven for me, because it was like my favorite kind of world. I got to play in the Scooby-Doo world. Basically, we sort of dropped Johnny into the Scooby-Doo world. Basically he's by the side of the road and the van shows up, and he gets kind of sucked into this. Well, he's going to his Aunt Jebediah's house, right? If I remember the names correctly. And so it turns out she's just trying to get rid of him. That's the whole mystery. But it was just like iconic in terms of like, these characters. And that's what I love about Scooby-Doo. And we'll get into this maybe more in detail. It's like, they're so, gosh, what's the word? There's so much themselves, like the 5 characters are like, this is an amazing sort of lightning in a bottle combination of characters, for me anyway, that you've got. And I know they've had their different iterations, but they've pretty much stayed close to their core character, Fred, Velma, Daphne, Scooby, Shaggy. They always had their kind of like iconic kind of way of existing, and that was, that's what the ascot, and then I can't see without my glasses, and everybody had kind of like the whole Fred and Daphne kind of like, are they having a romance? What is going on with those two? And it's like, and I was like, let's split up kind of stuff. And it's almost like, it was just, everything was so beautifully already built, by years and years of Scooby up to that point. Scooby's been in production, and it's the 55th year, right, this year. And I think that, believe it or not, I think it's one of the longest running franchises in the history of animated shows. I think episode wise, obviously Simpsons beats it down, you know, but I mean, they've been making Scoobies pretty much nonstop for 50 years or more. And so like by the time we got to it in the 90s, there had been a lot of Scoobies. There'd been Scrappy, there'd been a couple other strange versions, and also 13 Ghosts and all these different kind of like Scoobies over the years. And so by the time I got my teeth into it, it was like, well, these are obvious things we got to do because this is classic Scooby-Doo, and to sort of drop Johnny into that was just so much fun. My favorite joke, and I think, hope I can take credit because I remember coming up with it, but you never know sometimes. And was like, I can't see without my glasses, and Johnny's like, I can't be seen without my glasses, and those two coming together for me was just like, it made me giddy when it was like, oh my God, and you're like, oh, that's perfect, you know. So I hope I answered your question. I think it's like the idea that especially for Bravo Dooby Doo, you kind of wanted to play the tropes so sort of blatantly, but also kind of poke fun at them a little bit, and then sort of drop Johnny into that, and then he's kind of our way into poking fun at the tropes, because he's kind of like, he'll like almost, I think he does turn to camera a couple times and like go, what the, you know, it's like, what am I in the middle of here? This is just Jinkies. What the hell is that? You know? So I think it was just heaven just to do it, you know.
It certainly seems like it. And as you were kind of guessing there as well, certainly on the Scooby-Doo front, we're excited to deep dive into a lot of the memories you have from working on that show. And the first Scooby credit we found for you was the Haunted Holidays special. Do you remember how your work on that came about?
Sure, that's the one with the Glockenspiel, and I hope so. I hope that's the right one. That was a movie. I love doing the I would love any chance I got to do the movies. Like I did the Scooby-Doo Blue Falcon movie. Like Warner Brothers had a beautiful way of doing direct to video or direct to streaming, I guess now. I don't know where it is right now because everything's upside down in our world. In the world of TV, of animation and production, everything's literally turned on its head, and God knows how it's going to land, hopefully beautifully. But in the beautiful days of Warner Brothers, they would make these DVDs or direct to DVD, and they would make a lot of these Scooby ones. And I love doing those and being a part of them. And the holiday special was fun for me only because, again, it's kind of iconic, right? Going up against some kind of snowman or snow monster. It's like every Scooby has a Christmas special in a sense, and trying to come up with a new version of that also kind of mingles in with different things that I love, like Miracle on 34th Street and Real Santa, and what that would mean if they got connected. And I'm obsessed with the sort of the Glockenspiel in Munich, and like how can we work that into a cartoon? And you know, and so I think, and it just felt wintry and Christmassy, and I think that it came about because basically I think Jay Bastian asked me to pitch an idea for a Scooby Christmas special, and I pitched that, and then we did it together. And gosh, who did that? Was it John Ing, or was the director, producer? Was it Nate Davis Dory? It's messing with my head because he was Johnny Quest, and we were just talking about that. But yeah, it was just again, anytime I get to play in the Scooby sandbox, it's heaven for me. And there were a lot of elements to that I really liked. You know, like an old haunted house, and kind of like the Dr. Zhivago bits of Frozen, like it's a Frozen haunted house, and you know, you go into it. And so just trying to find, as he pulls his ear plugs out. Sorry about that. I talk with my hands clearly, so I'm waving my hands around. That all those elements are things that I love, and I always try and bring something to it that maybe I haven't seen before, plus stuff that I love, plus keeping true to the core characters and the core kind of storytelling.
And it certainly does sound like, you know, fun is the key element. It sounds like you had a great time on both of those projects, but they were quite different. How does the approach to, say, something like that Christmas special differ from your approach when you initially went into doing Bravo Dooby Doo?
That's a really good question. I guess for me, I mean, I have certain sort of like my own way of working that I've developed over the last 3 decades, which is that sense of, well, for me, it's always about character. So character, character, character. That's got to drive the story. I don't necessarily like stories that are all like plot driven, and you can fall into that with Scooby pretty easily because it's a mystery and there's a guy in a mask and you have to have a certain number of kind of like a red herring, and you've got to have some misdirects, and you have to have you have to make room for certain tropes like the hallway chase scene and things like that, and those romps, and the eating giant sandwiches. You have to find room for all that, so you can kind of lose the characters in the plot and lose the characters in the tropes. And I think that for me, it's kind of important to make sure you find some kind of balance. There's got to be a character-driven kind of thread to it. And so everything I approach, I hope, there is kind of a level of character in it, that the characters are driving this, and the characters themselves, Scooby and Shaggy, and we'll talk about the Courage crossover because I watched that one, the video you guys did on that. And you guys said a lot of really smart things. Was that sense that you want to give them something character driven to kind of like give them a little extra other than just being scared and running away and trying to eat something. It's like you want to not just do the tropes, you want to do the tropes with characters. So I kind of approach everything like that. And then I also have my kind of Zen and the art of writing philosophy, which is that every story has a sweet spot. And if you let it, it will tell you where it wants to live. You can force it. You can like bang your ego against it and go, my ego says I need to write it like this. And my ego says this character needs to say this now. And, and you're like, no, that's wrong. It just comes out wrong. But if you kind of back up and just like listen, and you start making choices and you realize that's a bad choice. Wait, now you start to sort of find the center. And then that center is where you want to live for that story. And so Bravo Dooby Doo, in a weird way, the Zen of that story is Johnny, and his kind of like the whole point of the story is he's going to visit his aunt, and she's like, I'm so sick of Johnny, I don't want to see him, so I'm going to scare him off, so it's almost like that's the story. So it's like, oh, that kind of works. That's kind of like the core of the story. And then that's also kind of character driven because the motivation of the villain isn't like a land grab or an oil well or buried gold somewhere. It's like, I hate my nephew, Johnny, and I don't want to see him, so that makes me happy. And same thing with the winter, the holiday one is, and the thing about the holiday one, I think there's probably been 2 or 3 different snowmen monsters, and so you're limited by what's come before, because by the time you get into Scooby, and it's been, by the time we did the holiday thing, that was, gosh, when was that, like 2012? So by then we've had 40 plus years of Scooby-Doo, and it's like everything you've seen has been done. Yetis and snowmen and all kinds of things have been done, and you've got to like live in a world that's already been done a lot. So you kind of try and approach it. I think that for me, approaching that one was different because the sweet spot for me was that kind of like finding a way to do Miracle on 34th Street, but as a haunted mystery story with a glockenspiel. And I mean, I don't know why the glockenspiel, I was so obsessed with it. I think I drove John crazy on that one, the director. Guy, I have to ask you guys to double check that if that's Johnny or not. My brain has got too many names in there. I'm pretty sure it is. And it was finding a way to kind of like do all these things that have been done before, but hopefully find a new twist on them. And I think that was driving the holiday one more than sort of the Johnny Bravo was like, nobody had made fun of Scooby. Not really. By the time we got to it back in the 90s, obviously everyone's made fun of it since then, but including everyone. And whereas the holiday one needed to be more pure, so you couldn't really poke fun at the characters. You don't want to. You want it to be more of a pure Scooby kind of story. And so that kind of shaped that thinking so that's why finding that sweet spot for the holiday one was actually probably a little harder than finding the Johnny Bravo one. So
I think the Johnny Bravo one is such a perfect homage. It's like, I guess people like to go with like the low-hanging fruit when it comes to when it tips the line between like a loving homage and a cynical just making fun of something which has been accused of stuff like the Velma show recently. And I think Bravo Dooby Doo definitely does that perfectly, where it's kind of making fun, but it's all out of a place of love and respect, and that's what I absolutely love about it. And another one, I think this is skipping ahead quite a few years now, a more recent project, which was the Mask of the Blue Falcon movie, which I personally really, really love. When we get to like re-reviewing that, I just can't wait to dive into it, because I think we reviewed that before our first true Comic-Con experience, and now that we've been to say 3 or 4, there's just so much that I could look back to, and it's so relatable. Like Daphne obsessing over those collectibles is literally me anytime I'm at a Comic Con with like Funko Pops and stuff. So I have to ask, because I know that you've been to quite a few Comic Cons yourself, like were any of the the kind of tropes of Comic Cons inspired by your journeys into Comic Cons? And I guess what are some of your standout memories from going to like conventions?
Oh, I mean, yeah, I think for especially Mask of the Blue Falcon, yeah, definitely. It's definitely a Comic-Con inspired story with a lot of elements and I love going to Comic-Con. I think especially early days Comic-Con for me was just like so like, oh my God, this is so amazing. And it was so cool, like you said, the collectibles, and even just going down the comic book aisles where there would just be boxes and boxes of comic books, and you could just go through them, and the artwork that people were coming up with, it was just like, and this was early days, was for me early days, back in the 90s and early 2000s, were some of my favorite years. And then I don't want to disparage the corporatization of it, but it got a little franchisey for me. It was like, it's the Batman movies and it's the Marvel movies, and it's like, well, what about all the good stuff that we used to have? It's like they kind of took over everything. And then recently, this last year, because they didn't go, because I guess because of the strike, and they were trying to save money, and everybody's on the upside down at the moment. All the corporations are upside down. They didn't go, and it was like, this year was just like those great years that I loved, where it was like, it's about the people, it's about the fans, it's about these collectibles, it's about people at home making art and bringing it and putting it up there. And you're like, oh my God, that is the most amazing poster of Captain America I've ever seen. And I love it. And I've got to buy it, and I've got like a storage unit full of stuff that I probably shouldn't have. But it's like, you see it, you fall in love with it, and you don't necessarily collect it because you think it's going to be worth something in the future. You collect it because you love it. And that's, for me, that's the Comic-Con experience that I love. And you're nodding your head. You probably agree. It's that sense of it's about the fans. It's always about the fans. And that's, for me, that's Scooby in a nutshell. It's like, whenever you're doing Scooby, you always got to sort of think back to how you felt watching it as a kid. And I know it's easy to go back to watch the 1969 show episodes and go, oh my God, this is terrible. I mean, and maybe from an adult 50 years later perspective, these aren't the best episodes ever, but they're iconic, and I still love them. But when I was a kid, man, those were the best, and they meant so much to me. And they would just like, if I was having a bad day, or there was bad things going on, and I could just watch Scooby for like 2 episodes back to back, which they would do sometimes, I was in heaven, because it was just beautiful that you love the characters. They take you away from things. It's got a mystery. It's really creepy. It's the designs. I love the background designs and all that original artwork. I loved it. And so for me, writing Scooby, in many ways, sometimes you can get caught up in the snark. You can say, oh God, Scooby, it's like, I've never said that, but I've heard people say that. And you mentioned the Velma show, which upset me actually, because it was like, I would have loved that show if they had loved the characters, like you just said, because I think that's what it needs. And why not? Why wouldn't you love these characters? You don't have to gut them. to have a great show, you can actually use them and they will deliver for you in a beautiful way because you love them. And I think I really appreciate what you said about Bravo Dooby Doo, because that could have gone full snark. And in a room full of very snarky writers, except for me and Van, we're the sweethearts of the room probably, there was a love there for those characters from me. And I think that I was happy you said that, because that meant a lot to me, that not to sort of like just gut them for the hell of it, for the fun of it, you know, like let's make fun of them, you know. It's like that sounds like bullying, doesn't it? We're like, I don't want to bully these characters, I want to sort of embrace them, and then they'll make me laugh because they're silly and they're themselves, you know.
Yeah, they're such iconic characters, and they've been so embedded within society that it's like you could be in any random situation and you could almost guess how Shaggy would react or how Velma would react, and that's the kind of basis of things that you can probably have a pretty solid adult piece of animation based upon that. But then when stuff gets skewed a bit too much, it then just becomes something unrecognizable, which is definitely a shame to see with all that type of thing.
I do think kind of the bit that we were getting onto in the film that
Oh
we kind of
yeah,
next
yeah.
wanted to say is, there's always like really interesting messages within things. And I think just in terms of that kind of, I don't know, not just respecting the characters, but in terms of respecting like the legacy and showing love for the franchise as well. There's some instances where that was done so well, like in Mystery Incorporated, when they got Casey Kasem to be the voice of Shaggy's dad. Do you remember where that idea came from? And like I said, I just think it's a really nice nod as well. Just it showed there was some clear love for the franchise happening behind the scenes.
I think and I love Mystery Incorporated. That was one of my favorite moments to work on. And I got to work with Mitch Watson, and I think the Casey Kasem thing was probably Mitch's idea. I think he's brilliant. I love Mitch. And we had so much fun, Mitch and I and Tony Savoni, the three of us pretty much I had a great office in on the ranch, which has just recently been demolished, which breaks my heart, which was like, it's the Warner Brothers ranch. It was like really close to the Warner Brothers lot. It was the old Columbia Ranch, I think. And there was like a lot of great houses on there, like back lot houses, like the Bewitched house, and gosh, what else was not Leave It to Beaver, but several other kind of like houses like that. And had a great office on that lot. And it was just brilliant. And we would sit in my office, and I literally had all 52 half hours of Mystery Incorporated carded out, because it was a very overlappy show. There was a lot of things that were tied in together. And so literally 52, the whole wall was just wallpapered in physical cards of like beats of each episode, so we could kind of track it. And then three of us would sit there and just write notes and talk about it and write everything down. And then I would break them out into outlines, and then we would get other writers to come in and help write stuff. But Mitch was great. And I think a lot of that, Mitch and I work well together because he's got a sort of a brilliant brain that could go a little crazy, a little snarky, or a little twisty, which is brilliant. And then I'm kind of like a big softy who loves the more traditional characters in terms of Scooby-Doo. And so like together it was like a perfect sort of storm of honoring the old and kind of giving it a new kind of Buffy-esque kind of take. And so it all kind of worked. I think that's one of my favorite versions of Scooby that I got to work on. I love them all, but that's one of my favorites. And the Casey Kasem, and we had Tim Matheson back. I mean, although he was more with Johnny Quest connection. And but Casey was great. And then he came in, he was so sweet, and I loved going to the recordings. And then of course I can't even mention, we're talking about Casey, and all I'm thinking about is Frank Welker, who's just the best human on the planet, maybe. I just love him. He's so brilliant. And I've worked with him literally for, oh gosh, quite a few years now. And so great. And he was the original Fred from 1969. And then he took over Scooby, of course. And I'm not sure where it all stands right now in terms of like who's recording what. as of today or this last year. Everything since COVID has kind of been a little bit weird. So it's hard to sort of like say definitively, but gosh, working with Frank as Fred and working with Frank as Scooby was just a joy. And a sidebar, and here I am ruining your interview with all these
Oh no.
No,
all these
not at
tangents.
all.
Um, when I did the Guess Who, we did the Christian Slater episode where I did it as a musical, and I meant to be kind of loose and a little bit more natural than like a full-blown, orchestrated musical. And the thing I found out was that my brain, Scooby could sing, but Fred couldn't sing. And that was like, Frank, you're the same guy. How can Scooby actually sing and Fred can't sing? And Frank's not really good at singing, but Scooby could sing. And it was like, it was just one of those brilliant moments of Frank doing these different voices. And one of the characters that he was doing could sing great, and the other character he couldn't sing very well. And it was just funny. It was just that amused me. So.
Oh, I imagine so. And it is great to hear your enthusiasm for all things Scooby, and especially going back to Mystery Incorporated. Like you were saying, I think for all it perhaps led to more complexities at your side, having a story that transitioned across each episode was such a refreshing take on Scooby that it was just so exciting to watch and rewatch now to this day. And you did work on a number of the episodes that I'd certainly say that we would hold as our favourites, such as Web of the Dreamweaver. For an episode that's so central on a character like Sheriff Bronson Stone, how much do you know about that character kind of going into writing? Do you know who's going to be voicing the character and that sort of thing?
Oh yeah, 100%. Well, I mean, at the very beginning, um, in the very beginning, before the scripts were written, before they were finished and the casting process was taking place, there was I think we kind of knew who was going to play the sheriff, ahead of time, just because we love him, the Patrick Warburton, and you sometimes you go for the people you love, and you're like, we got to get that guy in here, and so that was really brilliant. I think so that helps, honestly, sometimes to write for these characters. And again, I was the story editor on Mystery Incorporated, so I kind of had my fingers in all the scripts, especially the second half, and sort of like continuing the mapping, in more detail, because everything got more and more complicated to sort of tie up every loose end, and to make sure that all the mystery, all the threads came through. And then Night of the Dreamweaver, I love that one. And I think there were moments too, gosh, when you know the voices so well from the main characters, and then like you're saying, then you get these extra voices that come in and you're just like crazy about them. And then of course we had Gary Cole as the evil kind of like adopted Fred dad, and then we had the real Fred dad. That was Tim, I think, Tim Matheson, unless he played Daphne's dad, but no, it was Fred's real dad. And just we had a lot of great actors come in that wanted to just come in and do voices for us. And so a lot of the miscellaneous or extra characters, that the secondary and tertiary characters, had great voice actors attached to them. And Udo Kier, I just love working with him. He's such a individual, such a brilliant sort of like, wow, that you just want to sit there and talk to him all day because he's so much fun. And yeah, I can't say enough about those moments of getting those people like Patrick Warburton and everybody to come in and do voices for us, because they brought so much to the table. It was just a joy. And you're right, writing, you aren't quite sure sometimes when you write the dialogue for them how it's going to turn out until you hear them do it. And then once you hear them do it and you listen to it over and over again, because in animation we have to watch everything over and over again as we're working on it at every stage, so it becomes like an earworm, and you start to have those characters those voices living inside your head, which helps as you go forward, because then you know exactly kind of how they're going to say something, and you can kind of write towards them.
Yeah, and it's also a series that it works well for different types of audiences as well. Like as a kid watching an episode like Night Terrors, what you're getting is a really great, more spooky Scooby-Doo story, which is true to core Scooby-Doo, but it's also a bit spooky. But then if you're more in the know, or if you're a fan of, say, someone like Stephen King, you see so many different homages and references, and like being a lifelong fan of Stephen King. I mean, my mum used to read me Stephen King when I was a kid. I don't know if that's something I want to freely admit, but that was the type
Yeah.
of upbringing that I was kind of on.
Don't,
So,
don't get your mom in trouble. They go
no,
like, wait, what? Child abuse. You know, it's like...
I mean, it was the pop-up book to be fair, but it was a scary one. But that was the kind of wavelength that I was on. So when we got to that episode, my mind was completely blown. Do you remember if it was an intentional choice to kind of make that a massive Stephen King homage, or like how did that
Oh,
idea evolve
yeah,
into what we
100%.
saw?
Yeah, it was classic. I think, yeah, it was one of my favorite episodes to write as well. And I think that, yeah, it was, we knew going into it, it was going to be Stephen King. And that was actually one of my favorite Stephen King books was The Shining, and I loved the book more than the movie. And I never admitted that to people until it turns out that Stephen King didn't like the movie as much as he liked the book, obviously. But I love that book. I did read a lot of Stephen King, but I think Salem's Lot and The Shining were kind of my favorites, and The Shining especially, I was just blown away by it. And I think that definitely it had a huge influence on us. And Mitch Watson and I were always talking about things like that influenced us. And we were all obsessed with Lovecraft. Because as a kid, I was obsessed with Lovecraft too, and then we all were. And so it was like, in a weird way, between Mitch Watson, myself, and Tony Savoni, the three of us had these obsessions, the same obsessions as kids, between Lovecraft and Stephen King and kind of like and Poe. I'm a huge Poe addict, and I think that like these things kind of influenced our kind of macabre storytelling. And then for the thing I love about Mystery Incorporated and Night Terrors, and most of all, is that in a weird way, we got to take the gloves off. And when I was writing, I get to push it a little bit, And then another thing, one of my favorite things about that, if my brain is remembering correctly, is that I got to come up with all those different versions of four kids and an animal. And that was in a weird way an homage to it was a double homage. We wanted this has happened before, and we wanted to kind of really establish this has been going on for a long time. And if you guys don't remember the Hanna-Barbera history, is that Scooby-Doo and the four kids and an animal thing was such a hit for them that they tried it like 7 different times. There must have been 15 different versions of four kids, and Speed Buggy was one of them, right? Like 3 kids and a dune buggy,
Like
the talking
Goober and
dune
the
buggy.
Ghost Chasers, stuff like
Yeah,
that.
exactly. Yeah, there were like a bunch of those, and I think that was part of the joy of doing that moment in that story, was like also to sort of call back even to Hanna-Barbera. It's like there's been so many versions of four kids and an animal, that we had to sort of build that into it. But yeah, the Shining references, when we got to do the bathtub scene, I was just like, it was heaven, I mean, that was just like, you just can't, you just, those are the moments you live for. I mean, I've never had a bad day at work, but there's some days that are just better than others. And that was that episode, and that the room scene, it's just one of my favorites.
Definitely.
All the Shining references.
The more I watch Mystery Incorporated and like those gem episodes where there's almost more to it than meets the eye at first, I always just wish that there was more of it, that you could watch a season 3, a season 4. And I know when we spoke to Mitch Watson, I think it was over a year ago now, it was a while ago, but he says that there's been a few times where they kind of tried to get it together again, but I believe you did write the finale of the one we have so far, but at the time of writing it, did you know that that was going to be a conclusion, or was there potential at that stage for a season 3?
Sadly, I think we knew it was going to be the end, obviously we didn't want it to end. I mean, I could still be working on that. Was 10 years later, I would be, you know, but yeah, I think we kind of knew it was going to end. So one of the goals of the finale was to sort of, because we had taken so many, I don't want to say liberties, but because we had kind of expanded the Scooby universe, or at least developed it in a way that kind of went beyond the old Scooby universe, and had more of our Buffy the Vampire Slayer kind of version of things, that we wanted to kind of reset it, and we literally physically reset it. And then, but my favorite thing was Velma and Marcy talking about Schrodinger's cat, and Velma, the Velma and Marcy relationship is one of my favorite things that we put in there as well. And I think that when we got to the end, it was almost to be like they're getting it in the van and drive. And so then it's like, what you really could do is treat it as a weird prequel to 1969 Scooby. You know, yeah, that's almost as if they, or we also left it a little open-ended, praying that we would get more episodes and we would send them to college and we would sort of take it to the next level there. And so we knew we were going to be shut down. We knew 52 was as far as we were going to go, because that's how they like to work, especially in those days. They knew they wanted 52 half hours of this version of Scooby, and then they would probably wait a year and then do a different version for 52 half hours, et cetera, et cetera. And I've been lucky to work on more than 1 or 2 versions. But for Mystery Incorporated, it was heartbreaking, but we had to sort of stitch it all up, and in a way, knowing that this would be the end. And we, even if we got lucky to sort of have another season, we knew we left it open-ended just enough that you could go either direction. You could loop into the 1969 version, or you could go forward into another version. And yeah, Mitch is right. They've even talked about doing a live action version. That was at this, they were talking about that at the CW. I don't know where, obviously that everything's up in the air now or upside down. So I don't know if anything's alive, but yeah, I know Mitch would kill to do more episodes. So yeah, I'm right there with him. If there were more episodes, I would drop everything and just go and do that.
I mean, we always get left with a glimmer of hope. We always hear certain whisperings of things, and like you say, there's been mentions of live action series and so many other things as well. So certainly we've got some glimmers of hope of, seeing more Scooby projects soon. And I think, certainly at least for now, the way that it was brought to an end was all done so well, like you say, bringing all the strings together and kind of finding what we wanted to find for the characters, because certainly Mystery Incorporated was just loved by so many people. And like you said, that wasn't the only series. So after that, you were the story editor and writer for the following series, Scooby-Doo and Guess Who. Do you remember any particular episodes from that series that you're particularly proud of or enjoyed working on?
Every single one of them. I can't even tell you. I think I got that was one of my favorite working scenarios, because and I know there isn't really, as story editor, it was my job to sort of, basically I wrote every premise. We would go out, we knew we wanted to do like a sort of a redo of the 1972 movies, where they would have Sonny and Cher and the Three Stooges and Bob Newhart or whoever else they had. I can't remember. Don Knotts did several of them, I think. And we knew we were going to go that direction. That was the idea. And again, that was from like Jay Bastian, and sort of he was in charge of all that at that moment. And I love Jay. He's really great. And we knew what we were aiming for. And then Chris Bailey and I were kind of like putting our heads together with casting, and we would make we'd have everybody put names on a list, like who we think we should ask. And of course, there were like, it was a ton. We must have had 700 celebrities on a list at some point. And we were like, and we were like trying to, we must have asked hundreds. And a lot of them said yes, which was, I always thought was pretty exciting. So there's a lot of things that are exciting about Guess Who. And I think for me, one of the best things was, in order to entice the celebrities or get them to say yes, we had to do 2 things. We would send them kind of, was it Steven Silver? Oh gosh, somebody did that. Oh gosh, Stan, wasn't it?
Oh, the designs for the celebrity. Oh yeah, we spoke
They would
to
do
Steven
they would
Silver quite recently. Yeah.
was right. Yeah, I think it's Steven. I think he did those, and we were like, and they were brilliant. And so the two things we would use to kind of hook the celebrities in. I would research the celebrity and try and find something that was part of their life, hopefully something they cared about, and or at least something they'd experienced. In fact, the Mark Hamill one was one of my favorite stories that I came up with because it was based on his going to high school in Japan on a base in Japan. And so I was like, oh, that's interesting. We've never been there. Let's go there. And so then so all of them, including the Cher story, because I knew I wanted to do kind of a story based on that was sort of connected to the original Sonny and Cher story with the sharks and all that kind of stuff. If you guys remember that. So my favorite thing was I would write like a 2-page premise for everything like ahead of time. And I wrote a ton of them for people that never said yes, that I was really proud of as well. But that were like, they loved it, but they were like, well, I don't really want to do Scooby, or it's not really, I'm busy doing something else and I can't do it. But I wrote all the premises for like all the episodes, and I was really proud of that. And every premise had something connected to the actor, to the celebrity, something that would hopefully entice them, as also make them feel at home and kind of excite them about the idea of doing this story. And we got a lot of compliments from the celebrities when they would read these, and that was what made me super proud. And one of my best compliments was I wrote the Ricky Gervais script myself, and was terrifying. There were a couple scripts that were just terrifying to write, and that was one of them, because I actually am a big fan of his, and I think he's brilliant. And so I was writing the script, like, how am I going to write for this guy? Basically, he's brilliant, he's funny, and he ad-libs everything, and it's like I've got to actually write that, but I've got to write the ad-libs before, and so, and he paid me the greatest compliment. He said that he really loved the script, and he said that it was him. He said it sounded like me, and I was like, yes, that was the goal, and I was very excited. So I really enjoyed that one, and then have him record it. And of course, he did ad-lib stuff even on top of that, which was even better. And so I'll still take credit for it, but and it was just brilliant. And then my other one was writing the Morgan Freeman script, because terrifying one is because it was Morgan Freeman. You're writing for God. It's like, it's the voice of God. How do I write this script? And he was brilliant. And there were so many good ones. And then with like great moments of there was one moment we had Sia in the recording booth, and she actually came into the recording booth because she was here in LA. And we were, she was so lovely and friendly and perfect. I mean, that's the other thing about almost every celebrity we worked with. They're so beautiful and human and lovely and friendly, and like it was just such a joy to work with them. And I always love people that succeed, that are nice people. It's like you always want to see nice people succeed, because there's a lot of bad people that succeed, and usually for the wrong reasons. But when you see nice people succeed, you're like, yes, it's a victory. And so Sia was one of those. She was brilliant. And then Chris Bailey and I were going over takes to try and sort something out. And we said, sit tight for a second, Sia, we're going to go through these takes. And we were in and the microphone was on. She just starts humming and singing, like you do, like, but her voice is so beautiful that she was just singing this beautiful melodic, kind of tune. And we were just like, we just stopped, and we all just like stared at her. And she's like, oh, we ready to go? We're like, oh, no, we're still working. So there's so many great moments. I think it is one of my favorite shows, one of my favorite experiences, for a lot of reasons that I haven't even mentioned yet, which is we tried to do, gosh, how do you say? We tried to do a pure version of Scooby. We tried to do something that would harken back to the original. And I know maybe some people didn't like it for that reason, but I think we really tried to do a version that could fit in 1972 or 1969, in a sense. And I think we tried to honor all the tropes, and we tried to do the physicality the same way, and we tried to honor some of the backgrounds, like in that kind of the thinking of it, the animation of it. And I felt like we were trying to be purists in a sense, because we kind of wanted to show our love for the characters in the world. And then because it was a celebrity show, it felt like that felt right, because it was such a throwback to the early 1970s when they were doing all those celebrities, but that's what I don't know. I could go on and on. I'll stop because I should let you ask questions instead.
No problem. Like, it is genuinely like so fascinating to hear you talk about this, because like there's some people that we have on that, with the resume with Scooby, we could actually split the interviews into an hour and a half, 2 hour long sections about each and every project. And I think that's exactly the situation we're in now. Like, I could spend at least 2 hours talking Mystery Incorporated and at least 2 hours
Oh,
talking Guess
yeah.
Who, and no doubt that would be something that would be interesting. And it's so interesting because when you mentioned the style of Guess Who and the nature of Guess Who, I think it was definitely the flavor that Scooby-Doo needed at that particular time, because I love all the newer versions that we've had in that kind of main timeline. But when you think about something like Mystery Incorporated, I think that was quite into more of the darker territory, and then we had Be Cool Scooby-Doo, which was so much into the lighter territory, where I think now Guess Who was such a nice palate cleanser almost, that it was neutral, pure Scooby, that I think got a lot of more classic people on board with things, which I think was absolutely incredible. And it's amazing that you mentioned Ricky Gervais, because when you were talking about there was something that was important to the celebrity, instantly in my mind I was like, oh yeah, because I remember following Ricky Gervais on Twitter, like even before that, and every other tweet would be a picture of his cat.
This cat.
So
Yeah.
I was like, I get that. And I've been following Ricky Gervais since that original version of The Office. I think that was incredible. And you've said that you've got like so many outlines for celebrities that either weren't available or anything like that. If there was a third season, or there are a couple of celebrities or even like fictional characters that you would have loved to have dived into.
Oh gosh. I think in a weird way we were gonna do more fictional characters, although the Batman script was one of my favorites. But of Guess Who. Um, I know it's classic to have the Joker take out like multiple masks, but you had to. And then it felt like the fictional characters weren't as fun in the Guess Who series for me, and I don't know why. It felt like because we had we had freaking we had Cher, I mean, like forget it. I don't want to do anybody else. I want to do all these great celebrities that we had, and even Penn and Teller, they were so much fun. Wow, great guys, and such great moment. We had so many amazingly talented people that came to play with us, and it was just such a joy to work with them, and they were up for it. They were game, like you could get them to do stuff and they would be like, oh yeah, I'll try it. I don't know, I've never done this before. And a lot of them hadn't done animation before, and that was kind of a joy. So to sort of let them cut loose. And there was a Bryan Cranston story that I was really in love with that I wish we would have done. I think he was too busy, and I think he was like, guys, thanks for he was really beautifully genuine and sweet about it. He was like, I would love to do it, but I'm busy. I've got like 5 other things. And he was, and so, and then a lot of people, he was one of them. I would have loved, we had a good story for The Rock, but he would have done it, but it would have cost us our whole budget and then some. So we were like, oh, God damn it, can't do it. And then that was a good one. There was a couple others that I can think off the top of my head that we didn't do that I would have loved to do. I think I'm trying to think of it. I'd have to go back and look through all my stories. I don't know how many years ago now. Even if it's like 2 years ago, sometimes I can't remember everything. I have to but
I know
there
Chris
was,
Bailey mentioned a Michael Phelps one. That would have been
oh
Jazzagar
yeah,
back
that was a
then.
fun one. The Michael Phelps story. Oh, we got so close with that one too. Like there would be moments where some of these people would do like, gosh, they would want to do it, and then they couldn't, or like something happened, or the legal wouldn't work out, or or it was like, or they had to do something else at the last minute, and we would lose them, and we would like, oh, we'd all cry, and we'd have to like rush to fill the spot, because you're on a pretty strict schedule. I'm sure we could have a whole nother episode about with you guys talking about how these things get made. But so you're on a very strict schedule, and we had to get the stories in by a certain time. And it's like, oh my God, we lost this guy, and it puts a big hole in the schedule. And so we had a couple of those. But yeah, that was a fun story, the Michael Phelps one. Oh gosh, that's right. I was really looking forward to that one. Yeah, gosh, I'm trying to remember who we replaced him with. But I think there was just, if you give me more time, we could just talk about Guess Who like for another hour. But I'll stop. It's I would also love, I mean, we did the Johnny Quest one, right? I think that was an important moment for me because I love Johnny Quest, and or at least our version of the Johnny Quest with Dr. Benton Quest. And gosh, was that my brain isn't gonna work. Was that the Blue Falcon episode? We had Eric Bauza come in to do Dr. Quest, and I was so excited because he did such a great Dr. Quest, you know. And so every time I see him, I always hug him and tell him that we made my day doing Dr. Quest like that. Because it was like these voices are so iconic, especially like a Dr. Quest and a Race Bannon. I mean, you can't replace these guys because they were like what, radio guys or an ad guy or something. You know, it's like where do these voices come from? And they're not like actors. And so that was another favorite moment of mine, getting Eric to come in and do Dr. Quest in a Scooby episode. So that was fun.
Yeah, there's definitely a whole world of Guess Who that we could dive into. I'm sure maybe at a later date, because there's just honestly
Yeah,
we could fill
anytime.
that with hours on. Especially hearing Chris Bailey talking about how involved you were with that series, like it was amazing. Like just listening to him talking about your contribution to that series was just it was really great because you could tell that he had a lot of love and respect for the series and working with you on it. So it's just, and we're currently rewatching it now. We got season 2 quite early, but it took us like, I think the DVD for season 2 came out in the US 1 July, and then it was the following December that we got the DVD. So it was like a nightmare trying to track that down, but
Oh,
I'm looking
I'm
forward to
sorry. I
diving
would have
into
sent it
those a
to
bit
you.
more. Oh no, I mean I think the postage would have been astronomical, but the episode that I'm really looking forward to getting to is the one with Layla Ali. I think that's gonna be one that I'm like, because
Well,
I'd be
see,
nervous
here
to
I am.
write
I got all
that.
excited. I knocked my headphones
No,
off again. Yes. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I'd be nervous
She
to
was
write so many of
amazing.
those season 2 ones. Like, eesh.
Yeah. Well, that was a big one for me. I was starstruck with her, like, because I respect her so much. And I grew up in Louisville, Kentucky, and that's where Muhammad Ali is from. And he was my hero as a kid. I mean, literally, I could think of no. I mean, he's right behind me, still on my wall, all these years later. But he was my hero. And so then when she said yes, I was like, ah, you know, I was all excited. And she was so like wonderful and genuine and just such a great person. And like one of those charismatic people that you talk to and you're just like, I don't know, they've got like a light to them, you know, and she was just like that. She was just, I loved working with her. That was one of my favorite moments too. I think I wrote that one too. I can never remember because I was so involved in the premises that sometimes I feel like I wrote them all. And like, oh no, you didn't, Ryan. You other people wrote them. You just were like rewriting them and story editing them. But was so sort of like face first into all of them, all the stories, that it does feel like that. And because I cared about each and every one of them equally. And Bailey's great to say that because Chris and I had a great time working together. He was just the perfect person, you know, to work with, and he and I had so much in common in terms of what we loved, and especially our sort of what we love from the history of animation and Scooby-Doo and some of the physicality of the animation we really wanted to get in there. And it's always hard on a budget to do everything you want to do, so we had to sort of do our best with the budget we had. And I feel like there were some great moments that we really achieved. So yeah, Chris is great.
I suppose that's an interesting, maybe behind the scenes question that I had. I'm not sure how easy it is to get into, but say when I think about like a series like Mystery Incorporated, obviously there is a great deal of behind the scenes talent there, both be it the artists and of course the voice acting as well. But with something like Scooby-Doo and Guess Who, when it isn't a fictional character, it's almost banking on quite a sizable name being featured prominently in every episode. And to that end, behind the scenes and logistically, was there a bigger budget put towards that? And if so, was there like a requirement of a way that you were to able to ensure that that money there'd be a good return on that more than maybe a Mystery Incorporated?
That's a really good question. Although I suspect, given where we were with Mystery Incorporated, we might have had a bigger budget for that kind of stuff on Mystery Inc. and then instead of Guess Who. And Guess Who we had to do our best with what we had, and that even included the voice talent, included the celebrities, and we would tell them that, and what we would do is try and make their life super easy. Like, look, it'll be 2 hours of your life, and we'll do it. If we want to phone it in, we will be able to connect you via all these links. Like, I mean, it's been COVID. I think I've recorded every show I've worked on for the past 4 years over Zoom. And done all the crazy side links and everything. But we were doing that. Even then, it was like, we'll patch in with you and you can be anywhere. I mean, Morgan Freeman did his in Mississippi. Yeah, Mississippi. Yeah, I think that's where his farm is. He's got a farm and he drives like 2 hours to the recording studio when he does voiceover work. And then so in all honesty, more care was taken in the writing, I think, for us to sort of plan ahead, knowing that we had to get the celebrities right and we had to give them the right amount of voices and we had to sort of write to what they wanted, and they would give us notes, but they rarely gave us notes. I mean, I had the best phone call with Mark Hamill. It was like he didn't have notes, but he just wanted to call and talk about his experiences growing up, going to high school in Japan and all that. It was just like, and I think it was, I hope he was excited. He seemed really excited that we were like looking at that side. Obviously we did some Star Wars references, you can't resist that. But the real heart of it was, no, we're really talking about Mark Hamill in Japan as a sort of a teenager. But I mean, he wasn't, his history, and I think that we, by doing that, we kept our budget more manageable, and I think we had to, it wasn't, I think we actually had more money on Mystery Inc. Maybe I'd have to try and look at that more closely, but yeah, you always have to take budget into consideration, and I think the best way to do it is to plan ahead. And we actually talked to the celebrities and told them, this is the money we have, for your recording session, but we promise it'll be fun and it'll be 2 hours, and so that it worked. A lot of them were like, yeah, I just want to do it. Or I've got kids that love Scooby, or I've got grandkids that love Scooby. That was a big part of it, was that they had someone in their life that loved Scooby-Doo, or they loved Scooby, and they just wanted to do it, and we had a lot of that. You'd be amazed how many celebrities love Scooby-Doo. So that was helpful with our budget, with our rather limited budget.
I think that's one of the great things about Scooby is you can pretty much talk to anyone from more or less anywhere, any time zone, any age, and like they've got a Scooby-Doo memory at some point from some project, which I just think is incredible. And so I guess coming on to the latter end of things now, talking about the crossover with Scooby-Doo and Courage the Cowardly Dog, and we did recently speak to both Marty Grabston and Paul Scheffler, who were like the iconic voices back then. What was it like to write for them as they were, all the way in that classic series?
Uh what's the word? Challenging. I think you guys hit the nail on the head with a lot of what you were saying about that show, about that movie. Was we knew, I got, again, Jay Bastian calls me into his office, and he has the most amazing office. I don't know if you've ever had a chance to interview Jay but they've all moved. He had to move his office to a new building since they demolished the ranch. And you'd love it because he has, like, I'd say at least 1 million little figures he's collected over the past 20 years. And his shelves, he's got entire huge shelves of just everything, and every little figure collectible you can imagine. Mostly all animation. And then so he calls me to his office and he says, we've we've lined it up. We want to do a Courage Scooby crossover. And I'm like, yeah, I love that idea. I love Courage. And actually, Courage, my mom, my 93-year-old mom, well, she wasn't 93 when she loves Courage, but when Courage first came out, she loved Courage. She would talk to me about Courage all the time, and I never had the actual luck to work on Courage because I did a lot of that out of New York. And yeah, I love him. I think I really respect him, and I think that was part of what I was trying to do. And I'm sure it probably didn't work, but was show love and respect for the Courage show. I knew I could love and respect Scooby. But it felt like Courage was going to be much harder to sort of like use in this crossover because Courage is so much Courage, it's like so unique unto itself, and sort of have our beautiful, gang sort of spill into the Courage world. I knew I couldn't have Courage really spill into the gang's world, and the gang tends to be a little more fluid in where they go because they've been everywhere, from Zombie Island to, you name it, they've been there and done it. So it felt a little bit more appropriate to have them spill into Courage's world a little bit more. And you guys pointed out the obvious flaws of that, which is it becomes a little Courage heavy, because you're living in Courage world with Courage main characters, and it's our guys in a world where they've got to solve a mystery that involves Courage characters, and so, but I felt like that was the only way to tell that story and honor Courage. I imagine John didn't, I don't think he probably liked it, or he hasn't seen it. But what are you going to do? But I would hope that he wouldn't hate it. It's like, I think that was part of my hope, was like, I don't want John to be like, what have they done to my characters, and I wanted to honor them. And I think that I feel like, and I'm just speaking for myself, I really liked it. I think it was a real challenge writing for a show like Courage because it was just so beautifully out there, and I think I could have gone even further with it in terms of like insanity, but because it's Scooby and the gang, and you got to have I didn't want to have we kind of had real monsters, but in a sense, I wanted I wanted the unmasking, and I wanted to honor the Scooby storytelling in a sense that I was like this isn't a real monster. I know there's been some shows that even have like full-on real monsters. I think I've even been part of it too. Even Mystery Inc. we kind of had a real monster by the end of it. But I think that it's supposed to be a guy in a mask, even if it's a fox and a duck in a mask, but which is just wrong. But it's that's what you had to work with. And then of course the general, he's masked as well and stuff. So it's like I think to build that story again for me with the Zen sweet spot, it had to kind of go into the Courage world and be that if I was going to make it work for both worlds. And because if I knew if we'd taken the Courage characters and dropped them into a more Scooby-Doo world, it would feel weird. It would feel like a bad version of Laugh Olympics or something, like where the characters just don't belong in this world, But I don't know. What do you guys think? Did I answer any part of your question?
Yeah, it's such a good insight because I almost wish that going into that movie I could erase all my memory from the Courage the Cowardly Dog show and then kind of see how I feel, because for me, having loved the Courage the Cowardly Dog show, when we do get Cats and the Quack unmasked at the end, I'm like on cloud nine. I'm like, oh my gosh, it's these people. But then I'm like, but I wonder how that would translate to someone not necessarily invested in Courage and more following the Scooby-Doo DTVs. And so there's always that kind of,
Well,
is that the case? But for me personally, I was like, it's cats.
see, that's where we got both sides of things though, because I'd never really seen Courage
yeah.
before this movie. And I think having seen Courage, like you said, just animation wise as well, there is no feasible way to bring the Courage characters into the Scooby universe. However, by just lightening up the colours of the gang a tiny bit, you can move them into the Courage universe. It looks completely normal. They look like they belong there. The relationship between Muriel and Velma is one of my favourite bits of that entire movie. I love how just the contrast of they have the similarity and they both like puzzles. Velma's is out there in the real world solving mysteries, and you can imagine Muriel sat there with her crossword every morning, and that's her puzzles. But yet, how they both have an appreciation for each other, and Muriel's like, "Yeah, but look at what you can do," but then Velma can't solve the puzzles that Muriel does. There's a lot about the two that connect really well in terms of the worlds, I think.
Yeah, there was definitely a lot to love about that. And one thing that was a bit of a breath of fresh air for me is when that was announced, I was really nervous because, again, not disparaging the work of others, because I think there's something to love about every Scooby-Doo DTV, really. But after seeing the direction that, say, Return to Zombie Island and Curse of the 13th Ghost went into, where it was very anti-supernatural, which again is quite core to Scooby. There's nothing wrong with
Yeah.
that. But in terms of going into the world of nowhere, I was a little bit like, are we going to get some type of real world rationalization of that, which didn't happen? And so, in terms of the elimination of supernatural elements, is that something that's almost studio mandated, or are there certain guidelines, or is that just the preference of, say, the individual working behind it as opposed to the studio?
I think it's a question of, I mean, it may come down from the top. I can't say for certain. I do think that it's a creative discussion that you have early on, you know, like what are the boundaries? What are the physics of this world? I think in Guess Who, every single villain was, with maybe the exception of the Malcolm McDowell episode, which I loved. But it's real. Like you're saying, there are no supernatural. If you're doing pure Scooby-Doo, there's nothing supernatural in it. It's always some guy in a mask. It's always, even though it's scary as heck and you don't quite know how that ghost is floating, and then by the end of it, Velma's like, it was on this clothesline. It's like, oh, Velma, and like clearly that was not the ghost I saw 10 minutes ago, but okay, Velma, you know, it's like, but yeah, if you're doing pure Scooby-Doo, there's nothing supernatural about it. It's just a guy trying to steal money from someone. You know, I mean, it's a bank heist or an oil land grab, or you know, or buried treasure or something. You know, it's always some guy trying to steal something, and he puts on this elaborate facade, show of monsters and stuff. So it's like, if you're gonna do real Scooby, and that comes down, so that's the discussion to have. It's like, are we doing this version of Scooby, or do we have real monsters? Real monsters are like real monsters, or all fake? That's one of the first things you say. And I think we kind of crossed that boundary a little bit in Mystery Inc. We were mostly pure, and then we got a little impure. But that was kind of where we wanted to go with it, because it felt like, for Mystery Inc., it felt like the right idea to lean into some of the shining Lovecraftian kind of thinking, where it's like, oh, there is something about this world that is a little bit, you know, different, and then you can kind of reset it, and then Velma kind of explains it with physics. And so it's like, yeah. And Guess Who, almost everybody was a fake monster. But when you get into Courage, it's like you're already in a world that's so bizarre that it kind of feels like it should lead into being like almost a real monster, although it ends up being an asteroid. So then, you're going back to the Stephen King thing, right? Didn't he write the one about the asteroid turns the guy green and turns him into a plant or something? I can't remember. But that was kind of that influence, believe it or not. So it's rarely mandated from above, but it's usually a group decision that's made with the executives and the creative team of like, okay, what kind of Scooby are we going to do this time? Is it going to be pure, like no monsters, everything is a fake, or do we traipse into the supernatural territory, you know? And I think those are things we have to ask, you know, at the beginning.
Yeah, it's
Did
definitely
that
an
help?
interesting one.
It did, certainly.
Because I think there's going to be fans that grew up in different eras that they would hold something so close. Like if you grew up with 1969 series, then the monsters are always fake. If you grew up with, 13 Ghosts, maybe they're real. And like, I think with us here, I think one of the first Scooby-Doo movies that we would have seen would have been Zombie Island and Witch's Ghost. And so then we grew up thinking, oh, so sometimes it is real monsters. And then I'm almost wondering now if there's a kid growing up nowadays, if they're more exposed to the newer movies, if they're again gonna grow up to be, oh, the monsters are never real. So it's like a pendulum that swings backwards and forwards. So again, like you say, there's like uncertain times with animation in general at the moment. It'll be interesting to see where that pendulum eventually falls on when it is time to revisit that. And I guess on those uncertain times, the last question that we have for you before getting into the stage of wrapping up, because I do appreciate we've taken up so much of your time
I
today. So
apologize. Yeah, I've been having fun. I just been talking. All right.
no,
Go
genuinely,
ahead,
there's
Jay.
like so many that we could but IMDb again, maybe not always accurate, has listed you as working on the Mystery Pup series, writing
Yeah.
episode 1. Is that
Yeah.
accurate? If so, do you know what the progress is with that at the moment?
I know there was it was a cute show. I really enjoyed those scripts. I don't know how many are going to be released. I don't even know what's been released. I think again, it was pretty recent, and it happened right in the middle of all this upheaval that, all the big companies decided that they were all going to do streaming, and then they all lost their shirts, and then they're all like, we're gonna die and we're gonna take everybody with us. And so like lots of heads rolled in the last 3 years, 3 years especially, but 2 years especially. I mean, everybody's head's been rolling. And so then a lot of really cute shows that are in production ended up like being stopped. And I don't want to talk out of school because I don't know all the details. But I think the Mystery Pups was one of those that was stopped in production because of the massive sort of Discovery takeover of Warner Brothers and kind of the upheaval that's going on in general across the town at the moment. So
Yeah, it is a shame because I've paid so much attention to other ones of that nature, like Holiday Haunt, which again Sheriff Bronson Stone would have been amazing in that, and then Haunted High Rise with the Hex Girls, and I've kind of always glossed over Mystery Pup shamefully until working at a toy store very recently, when the majority of the things that we were selling was stuff from Paw Patrol and Bluey. Basically, kids just love to buy puppies, toys of
yeah,
puppies. And so I'm like, in another world, in another multiverse, the store shelves could have been stacked with Mystery Pup stuff. And I'm like, I was wrong about Mystery Pups. I think that maybe have been the most net good for the franchise. So it's a shame to hear that that's kind of gone through the wayside.
I think it has. I mean, you never say never. Sometimes things get resurrected like 3 years later, and then you're like, oh yeah, we want to finish that now. And like, okay, but yeah, it was cute, very cute scripts, very cute designs. Yeah, I enjoyed writing on that show. And then but I was just more of a freelance writer. I was more of like I came in to do some scripts because I love Scooby. And anytime anybody's doing Scooby, I'm kind of like, oh, can I come in and play? So yeah.
I mean, that's always good to hear because we certainly would love to see you working on more Scooby projects in the future. And like JayBee said, we're going to have to kind of contain ourselves and not throw another load of questions at you because I appreciate we're taking up a lot of your time already. So I guess in terms of, turning things around and looking towards the future, are there any projects that you're working on at the minute that you are able to talk about?
Gosh. I guess currently there are two things I'm working on right now. I'm trying to think if I can talk about it. One of them is an adult animated show, which is very much the opposite of Scooby, which is very like hardcore, bloody, violent kind of show. And so it's so anti-Scooby. But don't even think I should bring it up on this video. And then I did one of the shows I recently did, I was really proud of as a showrunner, was called Wolf Boy and the Everything Factory. It was on Apple. Yeah, that was a lot of fun. running that, and especially with Wiro or Toph Masri, who hadn't really done a show before, and kind of like taking his original idea and sort of like growing it into what it became was really fun. But I don't think, I mean, that's a done show. It was an isolated kind of event on Apple. And then I've got a huge kick out of, I mean, everything I do, I love. So it's like, what is it? The Duke Ellington question. It's like, you know, they asked Duke Ellington what his favorite piece of music was that he'd worked on. He says, the one I'm writing right now. You know, so it's like, whatever I'm working on is kind of my favorite thing. Like I did scripts for Stillwater on Apple. I love those. You know, I think it's just a joy to be able to do this kind of work. I think I would probably kill to do more Scoobies. So you keep that in mind if I'm in prison because I killed someone to do more Scoobies. They heard it here first. So I hope so. I think I don't know what the situation is right now with production and shows, and I think it's still the smoke hasn't yet cleared from the turmoil of the last year or 2 years. And I think that especially with the strikes and everything, and then the kind of upheaval, it's been a bit tumultuous, but I am doing this one show I'm on now, the adult animated one that I'm really proud of, and it's been kind of like my baby, and it's just brutal. So that's kind of what I can't think I can talk about it per se, but maybe if we do a part 2, I'll be able to talk more about what I've been working on.
Can I ask, where's the best place for people to keep up with your work as and when you can announce the projects that you're working on?
I guess I try and do it on social media, like on Twitter and not Twitter, Instagram, and and LinkedIn. You know, I'm sadly the guy that's like always obsessed with making stuff and not really obsessed with talking about it. And so I'm sure that's not really the proper way to be, especially in today's climate. You know, I should be like out there talking about everything. But I'm always like, no, I'm gonna do this thing, you know, and then like, did you post it on Instagram? It's like, no, was I supposed to do that? You know, it's like, and like, oh crap, I'm supposed to do that. So I'm sadly not as savvy as I probably should be. So, but Instagram, Facebook, which is an antique these days. And I don't really use Twitter or X or whatever it's called now. I just never got into it. There's so much writing that I have to do on a daily basis. It felt like spending more time writing was not what I wanted to do, you know, and because I want to focus my writing on the writing instead of writing about writing. It's kind of always been my thing. It's like people who write. People who talk about writing are not writing, you know. So that's kind of I've got a lot of pet peeves. We can do a whole show of pet peeves next time. I think Instagram is probably the best place to catch me. LinkedIn and Facebook for your older viewers.
Well, that is incredible. I'll definitely be sure to keep everyone updated with those, and definitely look out for what you do next. It just sounds really exciting. And so, yeah, for all you may not necessarily like talking about the projects in terms of, you know, like that side of things, you're very, very good at talking about the projects. So if ever you were available for a part 2, there's literally, we could have like a whole entire like chronicle because you've just worked on so many cool things. But yeah, thank you so much again for joining. Again, apologies for all the time we've taken from you, but it's been an absolute pleasure on our end to just hear you speaking about all of this. Because in the interview we did with Chris Bailey, the one thing he said was nobody loves the Scooby-Doo franchise as much as Mike Ryan, and I'm like, I see that now. Like, it's just absolutely incredible. So thank you so much.
Wow, that's so great of him to say that, but it's true. I think I'm sure there's other people that love it as much as I do, but man, I love it. I love those characters, and so as we're wrapping up, and I'd love to do another session with you guys. It's so much fun. The Scooby-Doo is a unique, beautiful set of characters in a perfect kind of storytelling world for me, and I just love them as characters. And then you guys said this earlier, and even in this interview, but I've seen you say it on other interviews. It's like there's so much themselves, like Velma, Daphne, Fred, if you drop them into any situation, you kind of know what they're going to say. And I love that about them. And it's not a cliche even. It's just like they're so fully formed in their own strange way, you know. And Scooby and Shaggy, forget about it. Those guys are just my favorite people in the whole world. But yeah, I love it, and I'm glad you guys love it. And this has been a blast, actually.
I think this goes back to a point that we were kind of saying before, like you were saying, just how well established they are. It's why you can just drop them into Courage's universe and they stand there so strong. They are so established to every person is gonna know who Scooby-Doo is, or at least have heard who Scooby-Doo is, because they love him, because a relative does. They're established and strong enough to be dropped into any universe.
They're
And
like
like you say,
childhood
hold the
friends
room.
in many ways, really. Like coming back to the Scooby-Doo franchise after a bit of a hiatus, it didn't really feel like, oh, I've got this to catch up on now. It felt like, oh, here's someone that I knew really well as a kid, and now I get to catch up with what they've done recently. That's the dynamic that you get with it, and I think that's really special.
Yeah, I love that. The Muse summed it up perfectly. Yeah.
Well, thank
Yeah.
you so much again. And thank you so much to everyone for watching another episode. If you do want to see more from us, then please like, comment, and subscribe, and we will see you next time.